Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Soul Land 2 Part 165 based on novel. So let's start. Therefore, even though he had become a Class 9 Soul Engineer, his understanding about all that was far deeper than before. That was the reason why he came to realize how important Hui Yuhao was as a prodigy, and that only Hui Yuhao could carry on his legacy and work towards breaking through and becoming a Class 10 Soul Engineer. Therefore, Xianzuan gave some deep thought about this, and decided that he had to find some way to convince Hui Yuhao no matter what, so that he would properly learn about forging soul tools from him. Under such circumstances, he needed Hui Yuhao to remain. Otherwise, wouldn't his intentions just be empty thoughts? Xianzuan wouldn't be surprised if Hui Yuhao couldn't complete the decomposition cannon, but he didn't wish to see Hui Yuhao not have any solutions at all. From what he could see, if Hui Yuhao could at least immerse himself within those blueprints, then he definitely would gain some understanding of them. That was enough for him. Hui Yuhao was a youngster who had just become a Class 7 Soul Engineer. What else could Xianzuan expect from him, if Hui Yuhao could understand a Class 8 decomposition cannon, which had a complexity that came close to a Class 9 soul tool? As long as Xianzuan could guide him, and in addition to his continuously improving cultivation, Hui Yuhao wouldn't need more than 1 or 2 years before he could become a Class 8 Soul Engineer. Xianzuan was very clear about Hui Yuhao's talents. That fellow was just too talented. Not only was he intelligent, but he also had formidable spiritual power supporting him, so he had a much easier time forging soul tools than other soul engineers. On the second day, Hui Yuhao still hadn't moved or spoken, neither had he eaten or had anything to drink. Hikaitu was starting to get worried, and he conveyed what he saw to Bei Bei. Bei Bei personally spoke with Xianzuan, and he wanted to interrupt Hui Yuhao so that he could stop, but Xianzuan stopped him. What? Stop? What kind of joke is this? Do you know how difficult it is for a soul engineer to be so immersed in his own studies? He can only truly experience the beauty of soul tools if he is frequently immersed in them and experiencing revelations from them. Only then can he improve quickly. Not to mention 2 days, he can spend half a month not eating or drinking with that body of his without a problem. The deal has been struck anyway, you guys will wait 3 days for him. If he doesn't come to after 3 days, you guys can just leave without him. Xianzuan stopped Bei Bei irritably. From his perspective, Hui Yuhao was like a qualified soul engineer in his current state. He was more than eager for Hui Yuhao to continue being in such a state. Bei Bei couldn't convince Xianzuan, so he had no choice but to allow Hikaitu to continue sending food and water to Hui Yuhao. But Hui Yuhao paid no attention to all that. His eyes didn't shift away from those blueprints. Hikaitu once observed Hui Yuhao closely for a little while, as he was afraid that Hui Yuhao was in a daze from scrutinizing those blueprints, but he quickly realized that Hui Yuhao was completely fine. The reason was because Hui Yuhao's expression was changing throughout the process. Sometimes he would frown, and sometimes he would express pleasant joy. There was a time when Hui Yuhao even slammed the table with his hand, which startled Hikaitu. It was evident that Hui Yuhao was just immersed in his own research, and there was nothing wrong with him. 2 days had gone by while Hui Yuhao was still like that. The third day quickly arrived. Bei Bei had already made all the necessary arrangements for the Tang sect. Xian Lina and Qian Duo, their 2 deans, had agreed to his request to take care of the Tang sect, and they told Bei Bei to complete his task assuredly. However, Elder Xian had also given them a time limit. Everyone had to come back within 1 month, whether or not they could rescue Tang Ya. The Tang sect needed them after all, and the Tang sect's development was related to their resistance against the Sun Moon Empire in the future. The third day is coming, and little junior brother seems like he won't be coming with us. Bei Bei said helplessly to Shu Sanxia. They were about to depart the next day, so they made some final preparations. Shu Sanxia pulled a long face and replied, I wonder why Teacher Xian is so determined this time. I'm honestly not confident at all without little junior brother around. I didn't feel that way last time, and he has always been the one planning strategies and whatnot. We're about to go onto the battlefield by ourselves this time, and I am a little lost about where to start. Bei Bei couldn't help but laugh. Seems like we have to train a little. Otherwise, won't we become laughingstocks? Shusansha snapped, don't bite off more than you can chew. Who will be the main control-type soul master without you? How? You, or me? Or who else? Not even Sister Xian is going, and Xian can still be considered a half-control-type soul master. Seems like Xiao Xiao has to take this role, but her control only works within a small area of effect, and when the battle is spread out over a larger area, she probably can't keep everything under control. Bei Bei, why don't we look for Teacher Xian to convince him to let Yu Hao go this time? He'll learn properly when he gets back. Bei Bei sighed and said, I know how important little junior brother is. However, Teacher Xian's attitude is very resolute. You know that the Tang sect couldn't have developed so quickly in recent months and years without him, and we couldn't have had so much support from the academy. Teacher Xian doesn't typically ask anything of us, so I can't reject his request this time when he is so determined. Furthermore, he usually has a casual personality, but he's very stubborn when he's decided on something. I'll only infuriate him if I look for him again. Forget it, let's just work hard by ourselves. I don't think we'll have too much trouble rescuing Xiao Yue with Elder Song and Dean Yang around. I guess that's all we can do, Shusansha replied exasperatedly. All right, I'm going back. Shusansha stood up as he spoke, when a voice suddenly came from outside. Done, he's done. Both Shusansha and Bei Bei were momentarily stunned as Hikaitu charged in from outside with an excited look on his face. What's done? Shusansha asked confusedly. Hikaitu said excitedly, little junior brother is done going through the blueprints, and he's starting to forge the soul tool. He's asked me to look for Teacher Xian. I'm here to relay this good news before calling him. Shusansha shook his head helplessly and said, Are you all right, second senior brother? Are you saying that he will succeed after he's done going through the blueprints? Won't that make becoming a Class 8 soul engineer too easy? You can go look for Teacher Xian. Yes? He might not succeed at forging the soul tool even though he's done with the blueprints. Hikaitu forced a laugh as he slapped his forehead. I just watched little junior brother stare at blueprints for 3 days, and my thoughts went sideways that he would definitely succeed when I saw that he was finally getting down to crafting it. Bei Bei smiled and said, There's nothing sideways about that. Little junior brother might actually succeed. Isn't he very adept at creating miracles? Hikaitu nodded and said, I also think there's hope. That's because soul engineers have to understand a soul tool's principles before forging it, and they have to figure out a soul tool's blueprint such as this one that they've never seen before. Little junior brother has been going through them for almost 3 days, and he's finally getting to work. Perhaps he's doing that because he's out of time, or perhaps he has really understood them. I'm leaning towards the latter, as little junior brother never does things without thinking. Therefore, he will only have a chance at forging the soul tool if he can understand those blueprints. Even if he isn't yet a soul dolor, he has twin martial souls, so his soul power is stronger than most other soul masters at the same rank. Maybe he can really do it, and his spiritual power is just so formidable. All right, I'm going to look for Teacher Xian, and you guys can go take a look if you're interested. Let's cheer little junior brother on together, and hope that he'll succeed. Hikaitu ran out excitedly after his speech to notify Xian Ziwen. Bei Bei and Shusansha exchanged a look, and they almost uttered at the same time, Let's go. Yu Hao was done with the blueprints, but he didn't start forging immediately. Instead, he drank some water, but didn't eat anything as he sat down with his legs crossed while he began to meditate. Yu Hao had spent almost 3 days on these blueprints, and he had consumed a lot of energy doing that. How could he craft a Class 8 soul tool without his energy in perfect condition? This was his first attempt. Yu Hao was still meditating when Xian Ziwen, Bei Bei, Shusansha, and Hikaitu slunk into the silent room, and he seemed to be deep in meditation. Everyone besides Xian Ziwen was a little stunned when they what he was like. Xian Ziwen nodded instead and said, That's good, he still knows that he should regain his energy before making this attempt. Seems like he's very confident. Let's wait and see. Waiting around was typically very torturous. At least, that was the case for most people, But Hui Hao quickly gave them a reason to remove that torturous feeling because something was happening to his body. Hui Hao only had faint soul power undulations before, but as time continued to pass, those undulations started to change. Furthermore, those changes were extremely weird. Faint gold colors began to emanate from inside his body. That was very normal for most people, as they would think that it was just his soul power presented externally. Most people could reach this state when they were unbridled and they didn't need anyone to protect them. However, Hui Hao's aura was just so dominant. A terrifying aura that resembled that of an ancient awakening beast rippled from his body as the faint golden light continued to flow out in waves. Everyone inside the silent room, including Zhuai Jinziwen, began to felt a little stifled, and found it difficult to breathe. Is he using imitation when he's meditating? Xianziwen asked snappily. I don't think so. Bei Bei's expression became solemn. He was well aware of Hui Hao's abilities, and they were inside the Tang sect. How could he be using soul skills when he was meditating? But what was going on with that golden light that was emanating from his body? Hui Hao quickly gave his answer as fine, compact scales began to appear on his skin. These scales were diamond-shaped and even appeared three-dimensional, as the center of every scale protruded upwards. Under such circumstances, there were many reflections off the surface of these scales, and that made the faint golden light radiating from his body even more brilliant and eye-catching. Hui Hao's formidable aura continued to rise, and every instance gave everyone a kind of frightening pressure. If we hadn't been so used to spending so much time with this fellow, we'd probably think he's a savage beast in human form. Xu Sanxia said admiringly. It didn't take long before Hui Hao's aura that resembled a savage beast finally stabilized. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. At least they didn't have to channel soul power to resist that tremendous pressure. But their eyes quickly widened, because a strange black whirlpool gradually appeared in the middle of Hui Hao's eyebrows. Everyone felt their spiritual seas quiver vigorously when that whirlpool appeared, and formidable spiritual power was immediately unleashed from within it like a hurricane. Hui Hao's spiritual power was released for just an instant, but that instant sent everyone stumbling backwards uncontrollably. His spiritual power was released and withdrawn in a single instant, but it was released again in the next moment. I can't handle it anymore. I'll step out for a little while. Xu Sanxia turned and left the silent room with a stifled look on his face. Bei Bei and the others also walked out with strange expressions on their faces. Hui Hao's spiritual power was too strange, and under such circumstances, they were continuously sustaining spiritual shocks. That was more painful than being in a fight, because they couldn't fight against it either, as resisting would likely create shocks to Hui Hao. The only person who didn't leave was Teacher Xian, who was already a Class 9 soul engineer. Xianziwen stared at Hui Hao with widened eyes, and his mouth hung slightly agape as a look of disbelief filled his eyes. What is that whirlpool? The others in the Tang sect didn't know, and that was because they weren't at that level yet, but Xianziwen was. Shrek Academy had wanted to express their gratitude for his contributions to the Soul Tool department, and several transcendent Dolor had personally helped him from his soul core. Even though his foundations weren't very secure, as he barely became a titled Dolor, and he could be stuck at rank 91 for his entire life, Xianziwen could probably spend his entire lifetime without becoming a titled Dolor otherwise with his foundations. If he couldn't do that, he couldn't become a Class 9 soul engineer. He knew how difficult it was to form a soul core because he had done it himself. Back then, he felt as if he had died, and he felt very deeply about how powerful and frightening a soul core was. But what was he looking at now? The center of Hui Hao's eyebrows was filled with formidable spiritual power undulations, and it seemed to release and withdraw spiritual power along with his breathing. It seemed like a soul core. But how's that possible? He's just a soul sage, so how can he have a soul core? It was very difficult for me to form my own soul core when I was breaking through to become a titled Dolor. Wouldn't he have a much harder time forming a soul core as a soul sage? But judging from the spiritual undulations that are coming from the center of his eyebrows, that is a soul core. God! Will this fellow give me a very pleasant surprise? No, that's not possible. Even if his spiritual power is strong enough, He can't possibly finish forging a Class 8 soul tool like this one. Forging soul tools requires more than just powerful soul power. A soul engineer also needs powerful soul power to support him. Otherwise, the soul engineer will find it very difficult to complete everything in one go. He also has to be able to use a Class 8 soul tool perfectly in our deal, and a decomposition cannon expends a lot of soul power. Xian Ziwen gradually calmed down as his thoughts stopped there. However, when he felt Hui Yuhao's spiritual undulations and felt his own undulations from his soul core, he still discovered some differences. At least, what made him more gratified was that Hui Yuhao's thing that was similar to a soul core couldn't compare to his own soul core in terms of overall strength. Then that is definitely not a soul core. Yes, doesn't he have that Eye of Destiny? Maybe this is his Eye of Destiny's unique appearance. Xian Ziwen continued to console himself. He had never heard of a titled Dolor who could establish a soul core between his eyebrows. Xian Ziwen turned and left as well. Staying in the silent room and continuously resisting Hui Yuhao's sporadically appearing spiritual power wasn't comfortable at all. Everyone was still outside when he left the room. Hui Yuhao was still meditating, so they naturally stayed back to protect their junior brother. Teacher Xian, don't you think Yuhao's aura is a little strange? Why do I not remember him having such formidable spiritual power before? Can it be that he has run into another miracle in the time he's spent outside? Shu Sanxia asked curiously. He Kaitu was deep in thought as he nodded and said, yes, I don't remember his spiritual power being that powerful. Furthermore, his soul power seems to have changed. I have no idea where that aura that resembles a savage beast comes from, and the golden light radiating from his body doesn't seem to be coming from his soul power. It goes from in to out, and I don't know what's going on. Feels like he himself has turned golden. Xian Ziwen shook his head and said, I'm a soul engineer, not a soul master. You have to bring these questions to the titled Dolor in Shrek Academy. Anyway, I don't care what he's doing, and he's not leaving unless he can forge a Class 8 soul tool. Bei Bei and Shu Sanxia exchanged a helpless look. They still wanted to try to convince Xian Ziwen, but it seemed like they should dispel that thought to prevent the bitterness of being rejected. Hui Yuhao meditated for a shorter time than everyone imagined he would. 2 hours later, the soul power undulations from inside the room gradually receded, and a gentle hum that resembled a dragon's roar could be heard. This fellow. If he's done, then he's done. Why is he calling out? Shu Sanxia laughed as he chided, and he was the first back inside the silent room. However, he realized something was wrong once he came back, and that was because Hui Yuhao was still sitting there with his legs crossed and his mouth closed. The dragon hum from his body was still resonating, but that sound seemed to come from his chest. The dragon hum was faint, and it seemed to form a feedback loop with his soul power as it resonated. What's happening? Shu Sanxia turned around and glanced at Bei Bei. Bei Bei had a dragon-type martial soul, and if he didn't know, Bei Bei should know. However, Bei Bei's expression showed the same astonishment. It was evident that he couldn't understand anything that was happening with Hui Yuhao. Hui Yuhao was startled as he gradually opened his eyes. His senior brothers and sisters were all here, and even Ji Juechen, the sword maniac, was here. Ji Juechen almost wasn't in time, but Jing Ziyan immediately ran to call him when she witnessed the strange things happening to Hui Yuhao. Ji Juechen was very interested in and curious about any kind of special circumstances, especially when they were happening to Hui Yuhao. Therefore, he hurried over as quickly as possible. But he couldn't understand anything that was happening to him. You all here, eldest senior brother. Hui Yuhao sprang to his feet. Hui Yuhao was completely reinvigorated, and he was in his peak condition after more than 2 hours of meditation. At his current cultivation rank, not eating for a few days wasn't a big deal. Furthermore, he possessed immense energy from the manifold mysterious ice essence, and that was enough to sustain his energy expenditure. Even if he didn't meditate, his soul power would be continuously rising, as his spiritual soul core's greatest benefit was that it helped the soul master cultivate in every instant. Xian Ziwen took a few steps forward and came before Hui Yuhao. Alright, there's not much time left, and nighttime has befallen us. If you haven't forged the decomposition cannon before daybreak, then you will stay here with me. Even though he suspected that Hu Yuhao already had his own soul core, now wasn't the time to ask him. Xian Ziwen had to wait for him to stay back before asking him. From his perspective, Hu Yuhao couldn't possibly forge a Class 8 soul tool no matter how prodigious he was. Hu Yuhao nodded and said, "You're very cruel, Teacher Xian. You didn't have to give me such a complicated one even if you want me to forge a Class 8 soul tool. This soul tool breaches knowledge about space, and you would have stumped me if I hadn't gained some understanding of spatial power in recent weeks." "What? You understand something about spatial power?" Xian Ziwen's expression was full of disregard. "Do you know what spatial power is? That's something that only titled Dolor or stronger individuals are worthy of studying. You little rascal, hurry up if you're going to it, and stop delaying. I will be watching from the beginning to the end so nobody can help you cheat." Hu Yuhao chuckled and said, "I don't need to cheat. Even though I'm not that confident, I'm still going to try. Let me warm up." He walked behind the working platform as he spoke. Hu Yuhao's expression immediately calmed down as he entered the air around the working platform, and even his aura seemed to become warm and calm. Xian Ziwen was very satisfied about that point. Even though his prized student hadn't been conducting any research into soul tools or forging them in recent months, he didn't throw away too much regarding forging soul tools. At the very least, Hu Yuhao's theory and concepts were still sound. Hu Yuhao was just standing there quietly, and he was silent for about 30 seconds as he adjusted his breathing, heart rate, soul power undulations, and even his spiritual power. He allowed every inch of his aura to enter a certain rhythm. Xian Ziwen still had a scornful look on his face in the beginning, but his expression quickly gave way to one of surprise, and that was because Hu Yuhao's current state was too similar to that of a very powerful soul engineer. Adjusting one's breathing and spiritual power are things that I've not taught him before. How did he manage to do it? Xian Ziwen was puzzled as he looked at Hu Yuhao. Right now, he was more and more interested to know how his student managed to achieve such a standard. At this moment, Hu Yuhao moved. He wasn't quick. He casually grabbed a piece of rare metal and placed it in a mold. After that, he lifted a forging hammer and started to hammer the piece of rare metal. Is he making the outer shell first? Xian Ziwen revealed a skeptical look on his face. For a soul engineer, the core formation should always be produced first when making a soul tool. This was because creating the outer shell of even an advanced tier soul tool wasn't very difficult. The real difficulty lay in the core formation. However, Hu Yuhao wanted to manufacture the outer shell first. What was he doing? In fact, he had thought too highly of Hu Yuhao. Hu Yuhao only chose to make the outer shell first for one reason. He was too raw. He had not seriously manufactured a soul tool for a long time. The last time he did so was during the tournament in Radiant City. Even though he had managed to understand the blueprint over the past 2 days, what if he made a mistake if he started with the core formation? He had to practice first and get used to the feeling of making a soul tool. This was what he did. A slight error when making the outer shell could be rectified. However, the core formation would become useless with even the slightest problem. He would then have to start over again, which was a waste of resources. Hu Yuhao didn't want that to happen. This was why he started with the outer shell first to get back into the feeling of making soul tools. Ding, 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 a series of crisp sounds resonated. At the start, Hu Yuhao was still rather slow. However, he gradually picked up speed. This was because the rare metal in front of him was very clear. Every minor detail on it was under his perusal. Under such a circumstance, he didn't need to think too much. In addition, he felt that he was simply too slow, given how strong his spiritual power was. This was why he naturally picked up speed. In others' eyes, he actually looked pretty quick. As he forged the metal, it sounded as if raindrops were drumming rhythmically against banana leaves. Not only was it pleasant, but Hu Yuhao's movements were also very delightful. Xian Ziwen nodded repeatedly as he watched Hu Yuhao's movements. There were generally 2 ways to make the outer shell of a soul tool. In one, the metal could be directly punched after creating a mold. This would allow the metal to take shape in one go. This was more applicable for larger-scale soul tools. The second way was to use Hu Yuhao's current method of forging the metal himself. It was comparatively easy to forge the metal on the carving table, since there were all sorts of equipment he could turn to. However, Hu Yuhao was so quick that Xian Ziwen couldn't achieve the same standard if he were in his place. What this required was stability and accuracy. At the same time, one's observations had to be quick. The inner parts of a piece of rare metal weren't completely stable. This was applicable across all rare metals. This was why any changes to a rare metal had to be carefully observed when it was being forged, even if it was only for an outer shell. This allowed for the most effective use of rare metals. Although Hu Yuhao was quick, he was accurate. Under his control, the lines on the metal were forged such that they were very neat. From this, it was evident how sturdy his basic foundation was. Xian Ziwen was originally very displeased with how lackluster Hu Yuhao was performing during this period of time, but this displeasure slowly faded away. No matter what, Hu Yuhao was a student that he had nurtured. Very quickly, the first piece of the outer shell was created. It was time for the second piece. With the first piece's experience, Hu Yuhao quickly adapted, and found it much easier with the second piece of the outer shell. Furthermore, the soul power undulations that he released from his body soon disappeared. Oh, this kid is using his own strength to forge the metal? Won't his muscles be sore? Sore? Hu Yuhao felt as if he had the strength of a 10,000-year-old beast even if he didn't use his soul power. Ever since he had fused with Wang Qiu, his strength had grown significantly. More recently, he had even absorbed manifold mysterious ice essence and a dragon pill. With these two treasures, he felt as if he were a human savage beast. When he fully absorbed all the medicinal power of the dragon pill, he would truly become a human savage beast. Although rare metals were tough, he was already as strong as a title Dolor. This was nothing to him. Very soon, Xian Ziwen discovered that his worries were unfounded. Piece after piece of the outer shell was created by Hu Yuhao. Furthermore, he was also getting faster and faster. Giving up the use of his soul power had no effect on him at all. Occasionally, he even lifted his head to laugh. Even still, the forging hammer still landed very accurately on the rare metals before him. A genius is a genius. Xian Ziwen raved in his heart. From Hu Yuhao, he fully understood how a spiritual-type soul master always had an edge over ordinary soul masters with regards to creating and researching soul tools. Hu Yuhao only took an hour to create the outer shell of a Class 8 decomposition cannon, which required more than 40 external accessories. Every part of the outer shell presented a beautiful streamlined design. Even with Xian Ziwen's strict standards, there were no flaws at all. After completing the outer shell, Hu Yuhao moved slightly. After that, he started to move the pieces of the soul tool on the carving table. Everyone knew that he was about to start on the core formation, which was the most important part of a soul tool. It was evident how complex the core formation of a Class 8 soul tool was. Moreover, this was Hu Yuhao's first attempt at a Class 8 soul tool. Not to even mention that Xian Ziwen wasn't confident about his chances, everyone around also didn't think that he would succeed. However, Hu Yuhao was very composed right now. His expression was very calm, and there was even a confident smile on his face. This baffled many people. They knew Hu Yuhao very well, and knew that he was great at creating miracles. This was the reason why they were willing to wait here and witness the birth of a miracle. Xian Ziwen only stood there quietly and watched. He wasn't rushing Hu Yuhao, only waiting for him to do his stuff. Hu Yuhao retrieved a piece of rare metal and focused. At the same time, he lifted his right hand and made a grabbing gesture toward that piece of rare metal. His eyes also turned dim golden. His gentle spiritual power was like a lady's hand. It landed gently on that piece of rare metal. To others, Hu Yuhao was only unleashing his spiritual power. However, Hu Yuhao could clearly sense that the piece of rare metal started to show closely woven lines. These lines were the blueprint that he remembered. Even though he had long since memorized the blueprint, he still carefully projected it on the rare metal using his spiritual power to ensure that things went smoothly. He didn't use the carving knife on the table. Each of the fingertips of his right hand now had dark gold blades at the end of them. Wasn't this his dark golden terror claws? However, he didn't fully unleash his dark golden terror claws. He only revealed an inch. In this way, he could achieve the same effects as using a carving knife. His dark golden terror claws could compare to most of the carving knives on the carving knife leaderboard. It wasn't that Hui Yuhao didn't want to use his life guardian blade. It was because his life guardian blade had grown too large. It was no longer in the shape of a carving knife. It wouldn't be very smooth using it. His 5 fingers gently tapped the rare metal before his wrist started moving. Suddenly, everyone saw a dark golden light flash before 5 slivers of rare metal slipped off the original piece. Carving using 5 blades simultaneously? Hikaitu opened his eyes wide. Even Shenzhen was stunned. Following this, Hui Yuhao's 5 fingers started to move gently and rhythmically. It was as if he were gently caressing the rare metal. Slivers continued to fall from the piece he was working on. The outer layer was soon being carved out. Hui Yuhao's actions weren't quick, but Hikaitu and Shenzhen both knew that his carving method was much faster than the traditional method of carving a core formation. The general shape of the core formation was soon carved out. However, a smile soon surfaced on Shenzhen's face. That's right. Hui Yuhao's actions were shocking, but pleasing. However, he realized that Hui Yuhao's actions weren't that magical. During this carving process, Hui Yuhao had only carved the outer shape of the core formation. He hadn't touched the most delicate part of it yet. He only simplified the carving process for the outside. The true essence of the core formation would depend on how well he did later on. Furthermore, this was only one of the 24 core formations required. The difficulty of creating this Class 8 Soul tool lay in how to combine 24 core formations into 3 core formations. This required all 24 formations to be completely flawless throughout the entire process. During the combination of these formations, immense soul and spiritual power was needed as support before the entire process could be completed. This video will end here.